Clear thinking is a powerful skill, but most of us were never really taught how to do it. Instead, we get caught in confusing meetings, go in circles over decisions, and miss chances to solve problems before they grow. Every day, this kind of unclear thinking quietly costs us time, energy, and trust. That's why I wrote Think Sharper, The Beginner's Guide to Critical Thinking. This book is here to help you think more clearly and confidently, no matter your job or background. You don't need to be a logic expert or a philosopher, just willing to learn and try some new tools. As you read, you'll pick up practical ways to tackle confusing claims, even when they seem complicated at first. You'll learn how to turn fuzzy or vague ideas into actions you can actually take. I'll show you how to build strong reasons for your choices and spot the weak ones. Get to the root of problems instead of just patching the surface, and ask the kinds of questions that quickly uncover what really matters. I've included easy-to-follow routines that you can use right away, even if you're feeling busy or unsure where to start. The tools in this book are practical and proven. They'll help you avoid common mistakes, make decisions faster, and earn the trust of the people you work with. The first time you read this book, you'll be able to take apart confusing claims, ask better questions, and make decisions you can stand behind. With practice, these skills will save you time, cut down on misunderstandings, and help you build a reputation for being clear and fair-minded. My advice, don't wait until you feel ready. As you read, try using each idea on a real decision you're facing. Clear thinking gets easier with practice, and every small step adds up. Ready to get started? Turn the page, and let's begin building your sharpest thinking yet. Chapter 1, Start Sharp. You're sitting in a meeting that should have ended 30 minutes ago. The same 3 points keep circling back, repackaged in different words. No one can agree on what the actual problem is. Someone mentions synergy. Another person nods vigorously at a claim backed by nothing but a hunch. You leave with 5 new action items, 0 decisions, and the sinking feeling that you'll be back here next week, spinning the same wheels. This isn't collaboration. It's expensive confusion dressed up as progress. Welcome to the hidden tax of sloppy thinking. It doesn't announce itself with alarms or error messages. It leaks quietly through rework that shouldn't exist, projects that stall because no one defined success, deadlines that slip because assumptions were never tested. Every vague goal costs you cycles. Every unchallenged claim costs you credibility. Every decision made on vibes instead of evidence costs you momentum. Add it up over a quarter, a year, a career, and the bill is staggering. Wasted time, burned trust, missed opportunities that never even register because you were too busy fixing problems you created by thinking poorly in the first place. And it's getting worse. You're drowning in inputs, Slack pings, email threads, hot takes on Twitter, reports that contradict last month's reports, experts who disagree with other experts, data that seems important until you realize no one defined what they were measuring. Infinite information, 0 signal. The noise is louder than ever, and speed is beating accuracy every single time. The person who moves fastest wins the meeting, even if they're moving in the wrong direction. The confident assertion beats the careful question. The polished slide deck beats the messy truth. The compound cost of confusion. Here's what happens when you don't fix this. Bad premises become bad plans. Bad plans become bad outcomes. Bad outcomes become case studies in what not to do, and you're the protagonist. One weak assumption, left unchecked, cascades into a strategy that wastes 6 months and a budget you'll never get back. One unchallenged inference becomes the foundation for the next 5 decisions, each one inheriting the original error and amplifying it. Worse, the culture hardens around it. Groupthink takes root. Dissent gets expensive, so people stop raising flags. The team learns to nod along, to avoid the friction of asking hard questions, to let vague language slide because clarity feels like conflict. Opportunity cost rises silently in the background. The projects you didn't start, the pivots you didn't make, the talent that left because they got tired of the chaos. And your confidence? It fractures. Hesitation replaces decisiveness. You second-guess yourself because you've been burned before by choices that seemed solid at the time but collapsed under scrutiny later. Communication becomes defensive. Every discussion feels like a battle to protect your position rather than a search for truth. Promotions go to people who seem certain, even when they're certainly wrong, because certainty reads as leadership and doubt reads as weakness. You get stuck. And the people who don't get stuck, who make clean calls, who earn trust, who move faster without breaking things, they're not smarter than you. They're sharper. They've learned to think in ways that cut through noise, test assumptions, and decide with confidence even when the data is incomplete. And that's a skill you can build. What sharp thinking unlocks. By the time you finish this book the first time, you'll be able to deconstruct any claim in minutes. Someone says, "We should pivot to strategy X because the market is shifting." You'll instantly identify the claim, pivot to X, the reason, market shift, and the evidence, which often is missing. You'll flag the hidden premises, what has to be true for this to work, and spot the weak links before resources get committed. You'll assign a confidence level. I'm 60% sure this is directionally right, and here's the one test that would move me to 80%. That's not skepticism for its own sake. That's disciplined judgment that saves time and money. You'll ask higher leverage questions. Instead of, "Why are we failing?" you'll ask, "What conditions produce success, and which of those are we missing?" Instead of accepting the first frame, you'll reframe user impact, system mechanics, time dynamics. You'll surface assumptions fast, mark which ones are testable, and identify the crux, the single decisive unknown that once resolved makes everything else easier. Meetings get shorter, options get better, decisions get simpler. You'll decide cleanly under uncertainty. You'll set minimum evidence thresholds before you commit. You'll distinguish reversible choices, low cost to undo, so move fast, from irreversible ones, high cost to undo, so move carefully. You'll define one-step next actions that reduce risk without paralyzing progress. No more analysis paralysis. No more reckless bets disguised as boldness. Just calibrated confidence and forward motion. The compounding advantage. Keep practicing, and the wins compound. Clarity becomes habitual. Your meetings start concluding with actual decisions instead of "let's circle back." Your inbox shrinks because you triage by relevance and significance, not urgency and volume. Rework drops. Throughput rises. You stop solving the same problem 3 times because you solved it right the first time. Your reputation shifts. Stakeholders start seeking your input first, not last. You get pulled into high-stakes decisions because people trust your judgment under pressure. When a crisis hits, you're the one they want in the room, not because you have all the answers, but because you ask the right questions and don't waste time on the wrong ones. Career resilience follows. The skills that make you sharp in calm times make you indispensable in chaos. The path forward. This book is a system, not a collection of tips. Each chapter builds on the last, and the order matters. You'll start by adopting standards, 9 simple questions that test whether your thinking is clear, accurate, logical, and relevant. Think of it as a quality control pass you can run in 3 minutes on any email, argument, or plan. Standards give you a shared language for speed. They turn subjective debates into objective checks. Next, you'll map the elements of thought: purpose, question, information, assumptions, inferences, concepts, viewpoints, implications. You'll learn to sketch a 1-page thought canvas that forces alignment and exposes contradictions before they explode into expensive mistakes. Structure first, style later. Then you'll build strong arguments using the claim-reason-evidence structure, matching your reasoning mode to the task at hand. You'll stress test logic, expose hidden premises, and right-size conclusions to fit the evidence. No more circular debates. No more opinions masquerading as analysis. From there, you'll demand evidence, ranking sources, triangulating findings, separating correlation from causation. You'll learn when to accept a claim, when to hold it provisionally, and when to reject it outright, all with clear criteria you can defend. You'll move into causality, using counterfactual tests and simple diagrams to find root causes instead of symptoms. You'll design low-risk probes that actually decide instead of just gathering more data. You'll defend against bias, confirmation, anchoring, overconfidence by pre-committing to base rates, generating rival hypotheses, and calibrating your forecasts against reality. You'll learn to ask better questions, reframing problems, and finding the crux that unlocks leverage. And finally, you'll integrate everything into a daily routine that compounds mastery over time. Less effort, better results, more trust. This sequence isn't arbitrary. Quality before structure, structure before persuasion, persuasion before truth tests before error control before leverage, leverage before automation. Each step depends on the one before it. Skip ahead and you'll polish bad questions, build persuasive arguments on weak evidence, or automate biased thinking at scale. Follow the path and you'll build a foundation that holds under pressure. Winners and losers. Two types of people will read this book. Winners approach it with humility, curiosity, and a test-driven mindset. They're slow to conclude, but fast to revise when new evidence arrives. They actively seek disconfirming evidence because they'd rather be wrong in private than wrong in public. They treat every belief as provisional and every decision as a hypothesis to test. Losers arrive certain without data. They argue to win, not to learn. When proven wrong, they move the goalposts or attack the messenger. They confuse confidence with competence and volume with validity. They'll skim this book looking for ammunition to win their next argument, miss the point entirely, and wonder why nothing changes. Which one are you? The answer will show up in what you do next. The tools are here. The map is clear. The only question left is whether you'll use them, or whether you'll keep paying the hidden tax of confusion, one wasted meeting at a time. The next chapter reveals the first weapon in your arsenal, a 3-minute routine that turns fuzzy ideas into inspectable work and gives your team a shared language for speed. But only if you're ready to stop nodding along and start demanding better. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to grow to the top and activate notifications to receive more self-improvement tips that will supercharge your growth. And make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you for your support. Chapter 2, Think Standards. Someone just told you the project is mostly on track. What does that mean? 70% complete? 80%? On schedule or over budget? Hitting the original goals or a watered-down version? You nod because everyone else is nodding, but you have no idea what you just agreed to. 3 weeks later, the project is a disaster, and nobody can pinpoint when it went off the rails because nobody defined what on track meant in the first place. This is the cost of operating without standards. Not the boring ISO certification kind, the kind that lets you look at any statement, any argument, any plan and ask, is this actually good enough to act on? Most people skip this step. They assume smart people produce quality thinking automatically, that rigor emerges from talent alone. They're wrong. Intelligence without standards is a sports car without brakes. Fast, impressive, and headed for a crash. Your invisible measuring stick. Think about building a house. You wouldn't let a contractor eyeball whether the walls are straight or the foundation is level. You'd use a ruler, a level, a square, tools that make quality visible and measurable. Standards do the same thing for thinking. They give you a way to inspect work before it becomes expensive mistakes. Without them, quality becomes subjective. One person's clear is another person's vague. One person's thorough is another person's surface level. Debates spiral because you're arguing about conclusions when the real problem is you never agreed on what good thinking looks like. Standards create a shared vocabulary. They let you say, this claim lacks precision, add a number and a time frame, and everyone knows exactly what needs to happen next. No politics, no posturing, just a gap to close. And here's the leverage. Catching errors early is cheap. Catching them late is catastrophic. A vague goal costs you an hour to clarify today or 6 months of misdirected work tomorrow. An untested assumption costs you a conversation now or a failed launch later. Standards are your early warning system. They surface problems while they're still fixable before they compound into crises that tank projects and reputations. The 9 gates. So what are these standards? There are 9 of them, and each one targets a specific way thinking breaks down. Clarity fights ambiguity. Can someone else understand exactly what you mean, or are you hiding behind jargon and abstraction? Accuracy fights error. Is this statement actually true, or just plausible sounding? Precision fights vagueness. Are you specific enough to test this, or could it mean anything? Relevance fights distraction. Does this point actually matter to the decision at hand, or are you wandering off into interesting but useless territory? Depth fights superficiality. Have you thought past the obvious first layer, or are you stopping where the real complexity begins? Breadth fights narrowness. Are you considering multiple perspectives, or just the one that confirms what you already believe? Logic fights contradiction. Do your premises actually support your conclusion, or are you making leaps that don't hold up under scrutiny? Significance fights trivia. Does this finding actually change anything important, or is it just noise? And fairness fights bias. Are you representing opposing views accurately, or are you setting up straw men to knock down? Each standard is a gate. Your thinking has to pass through all 9 before it's ready to drive decisions. Miss one, and you've got a weak link that will snap under pressure. The beauty is you can run this check in about 3 minutes once you know what to look for. The 3-minute filter. Here's how it works in practice. Start with a single claim, 1 sentence, no hedges, clear verb. We should expand into the European market next quarter. Now run it through the gates, 1 question per standard. Is it clear? Can someone unfamiliar with the context understand what you mean by expand and European market? Or are those terms doing heavy lifting you haven't unpacked? Is it accurate? Do you actually have evidence that this is the right move, or is this a guess dressed up as strategy? Is it precise? What does next quarter mean? Q2, Q3? Which countries in Europe? What does success look like in numbers? Is it relevant? Does this connect to your current strategic priorities, or is it a shiny distraction? Is it deep? Have you thought through the operational complexity, regulatory hurdles, competitive landscape, or just the upside? Is it broad? Have you considered the risks, the opportunity costs, the dissenting opinions from people who know these markets? Is it logical? Do your reasons for expanding actually support the conclusion, or are you skipping steps? Is it significant? If you're right, does this materially change outcomes, or is it a marginal gain that's not worth the effort? Is it fair? Are you honestly representing the challenges and counter-arguments, or cherry-picking data that supports the move? Go through those 9 questions fast. Don't polish. Don't perfect. Just identify the weakest link, the standard where your thinking fails hardest, and fix that one thing. Then recheck. Often, repairing one weakness reveals another. That's fine. You're not aiming for perfection. You're aiming for good enough to decide with confidence. The myths that keep you stuck. People resist this. They say smart people don't need checklists, that standards are for beginners or bureaucrats. Wrong. Intelligence doesn't equal reliability. Brilliant people make spectacular errors all the time because they skip basic checks, trusting their intuition to catch what only structure can catch. Standards aren't a crutch for the slow, they're a multiplier for the fast. They let you move quickly without breaking things. Others worry that demanding clarity will slow down innovation, that you need ambiguity to explore new ideas. Also wrong, clarity accelerates execution. Vague goals create thrash. Teams pulling in different directions, resources wasted on misaligned work, endless meetings to align because you never defined what you were aligning toward. Clarity up front buys you speed downstream. You can explore with precision. You can experiment with clear hypotheses. Ambiguity isn't creative, it's expensive. And then there's the fairness objection. People think being fair to opposing views weakens your argument, that you should stack the deck in your favor. Backwards. Fairness increases credibility. When you steelman the other side, present their strongest argument, not a caricature, and still make your case, you earn trust. People know you're not hiding inconvenient truths. They know you've done the hard work of thinking through objections. That's persuasive. Cherry-picking and straw men might win a debate in the moment, but they lose you influence over time. Quick wins you can use today. Let's get tactical. You want clarity? Use the one-breath test. If you can't explain your claim in a single breath without gasping for air, it's too complicated. Simplify. Break it into smaller pieces. Pick one verb and stick with it. You want precision? Add boundaries and numbers. Instead of soon, say within 2 weeks. Instead of significant improvement, say 15% reduction in cycle time. Precision makes promises testable. Vague commitments let you move goalposts later. Precise ones force accountability now. You want relevance? Highlight every clause in your argument and ask, does this connect to the decision? If not, cut it. Off-topic material isn't just harmless padding, it's cognitive load that distracts from what matters. Ruthless relevance keeps discussions on track and decisions crisp. You want significance? Ask, so what, after every claim. If the answer is not much, you're chasing trivia. If the answer is, this changes our entire strategy, you've found leverage. Significance separates the signal from the noise. And you want fairness? Steelman before you critique. Take the opposing argument, make it as strong as you can, then respond to that version. If you can't do this, you don't understand the other side well enough to dismiss it. Fairness isn't about being nice, it's about being rigorous. What winning looks like. Start using standards consistently, and you'll notice meetings ending with crisp summaries instead of vague action items. People will stop talking past each other because you've enforced clarity and relevance. Decisions will stick because you've tested them for logic and significance before committing. That's the good outcome. You become the person who cuts through confusion. Keep going, and your team adopts the checklist. They start pre-checking their own work before bringing it to you. Cycle time drops. Misunderstandings vanish. Rework becomes rare because errors get caught early. That's the excellent outcome. You've built a culture of quality. At the highest level, you become trusted as a reasoning leader. Stakeholders start editing their proposals to meet your standards before they even schedule the meeting. They know you'll ask the hard questions, so they answer them in advance. You're no longer fighting for rigor. It's the price of entry to work with you. That's the best outcome. Your standards become the norm. The traps to avoid. But watch out, standards can backfire if you misuse them. The first trap is over-polishing paralysis. You get so obsessed with perfection that you never ship. Fix this with a 3-minute cap and a good enough to decide bar. Standards aren't about flawless thinking. They're about reliable thinking. Know when to stop. The second trap is weaponizing standards. You use them to tear down other people's ideas without offering better alternatives. You become the critic who kills momentum. Fix this by requiring fairness first. Steelman before you attack. If you can't make the other side's case, you don't get to dismiss it. The third trap is ignoring significance. You obsess over clarity, precision, and logic while chasing ideas that don't matter. You polish trivia to a mirror shine. Fix this by asking impact and decision relevance explicitly. If it doesn't change what you do, it doesn't deserve your time. Standards are tools, not weapons. Use them to build, not destroy. Use them to accelerate, not stall. Use them to align, not alienate. The shift ahead. You've got the filter now. 9 questions, 3 minutes, 1 weak link to fix before you move. That alone will clean up half the confusion in your work. But here's the thing. Standards tell you whether your thinking is good. They don't tell you what to think about. They measure quality, but they don't provide structure. That's the next layer. Because even the clearest, most accurate argument can still be aimed at the wrong question. Even the most logical plan can rest on untested assumptions. Even the fairest analysis can miss the implications that matter most. Standards catch surface errors, but the deep errors, the ones that sink projects and careers, live in the structure of thought itself. And that structure has parts you need to see before you can fix them. Chapter 3. Thought Elements. You're arguing with someone about whether to launch the new feature. They say it's essential. You say it's premature. 20 minutes in, you realize you're not even talking about the same thing. They're focused on user retention. You're worried about technical debt. Neither of you noticed you were solving different problems until you'd already wasted half the meeting defending positions that weren't actually in conflict. This happens because thinking is invisible. It happens inside your head, a tangle of goals and guesses and half-formed conclusions that feel coherent to you but come out garbled when you try to explain them. And when two invisible tangles collide in a meeting, you get friction without progress. People talk past each other, defend points nobody's attacking, and leave frustrated because we just can't seem to align. The problem isn't alignment. The problem is you can't align what you can't see. The hidden architecture. Every decision, every argument, every plan is built from the same basic parts. You might not notice them because they're woven together so tightly they feel like one thing. But they're not. There's the purpose, what you're actually trying to accomplish. There's the question, the specific thing you need to answer to move forward. There's the information you're working with, the assumptions you're taking for granted, the inferences you're drawing, the concepts you're using, the viewpoints you're considering, and the implications that follow if you're right or wrong. 8 elements. Every time you think, you're assembling these pieces, whether you realize it or not. And when one piece is broken, when your purpose is vague, your question is wrong, your assumptions are untested, your implications are ignored, the whole structure wobbles. You can have perfect logic and still reach a terrible conclusion if you started with the wrong question. You can have solid evidence and still make a disastrous call if you missed a critical assumption. Standards tell you if each piece is good. Elements tell you if the pieces fit together. This is why smart people make dumb mistakes. They optimize one element and neglect the others. They gather mountains of information but never clarify what question they're answering. They draw brilliant inferences from faulty assumptions. They define terms precisely but ignore the viewpoints that would expose their blind spots. Intelligence doesn't save you from structural errors. Only structure does. Why visibility wins. When you externalize the elements, when you write them down, sketch them out, make them visible, 3 things happen. First, you reduce cognitive load. Your brain stops juggling all 8 pieces in working memory and can focus on improving each one. Second, you expose contradictions. You see that your stated purpose doesn't match the question you're asking, or that your inference doesn't actually follow from your information. Third, you make improvement observable. You can point to the weak element and say, "Fix this," instead of arguing in circles about whether the whole plan feels right. Think of it like debugging code. If the program is broken and you can't see the code, you're guessing. You tweak random things and hope something works. But if you can see the code, you can trace the logic, find the bug, fix it. Same with thinking. Make the elements visible, and you can diagnose where the breakdown is. Is the purpose misaligned with the question? Is the information insufficient for the inference? Are the assumptions contradicting each other? Once you see it, you can fix it. And here's the leverage. Most debates aren't about conclusions. They're about mismatched elements. One person is optimizing for purpose A, while another is solving for purpose B. One person is treating an assumption as a fact, while another is questioning it. One person is considering viewpoint X, while another is locked into viewpoint Y. When you map the elements, these mismatches become obvious. You stop arguing about who's right and start clarifying which element needs alignment. Meetings get shorter, decisions get clearer, rework drops. The 8 building blocks. So what are these elements? Start with purpose. What are you actually trying to do? Not the grand vision or the mission statement, the specific outcome you're aiming for right now, 10 words or less. If you can't state it crisply, you don't have a purpose. You have a vague intention that will drift as soon as pressure hits. Next, the question. What do you need to answer to achieve that purpose? This isn't a rhetorical question or a leading question. It's neutral, specific, and answerable. The question frames everything else. Get it wrong, and you'll answer brilliantly but uselessly. Get it right, and the path forward becomes clear. Then information. What data, facts, observations, or evidence are you working with? List the sources. Label your confidence in each piece. Distinguish what you know from what you think you know. This is where most people mix evidence with assumption and end up building castles on sand. Assumptions are the things you're taking as true without proof. They're necessary. You can't verify everything, but they're also dangerous. Every assumption is a hypothesis in disguise, a bet that could be wrong. Surface your top 5. Mark which ones are testable. Treat them like live grenades. Handle with care. Inferences are the conclusions you're drawing from your information. They're the logical leaps, the if this, then that connections. Draft them provisionally. Link each inference back to the specific information that supports it. If you can't draw a clear line from evidence to conclusion, your inference is floating. Concepts are the key terms and definitions you're using. What do you mean by success, by scalable, by urgent? Vague concepts create vague thinking. Define your terms, especially the ones doing heavy lifting in your argument. Viewpoints are the different perspectives that matter to this decision. Who sees this differently? What would they prioritize? What would they worry about? Multiple viewpoints aren't about being politically correct. They're about exposing blind spots. If you're only seeing the problem from one angle, you're missing half the picture. And implications are what follows if you're right or wrong. If this plan works, what happens next? If it fails, what's the downside? Most people obsess over whether their idea is good and ignore what happens after. Implications force you to think 2 steps ahead, to see the second-order effects before they blindside you. The one-page map. Here's how you use this in practice. Take a blank page. Draw 8 boxes, 1 for each element. Start filling them in, fast and rough. Purpose in 10 words. Question in 1 sentence. Information as a quick list with confidence labels, high, medium, low. Top 5 assumptions, marked testable or not. Provisional inferences with arrows linking back to the information that supports them. Key concepts with short definitions. Major viewpoints with the decision levers they care about. Implications in 2 columns, upside if true, downside if false. This is your thought canvas. It's not a polished document. It's a working sketch, a diagnostic tool. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're trying to see the structure clearly enough to fix what's broken. 5 minutes to draft, another 5 to review and tighten. That's it. The magic happens when you do this with a team. Everyone fills out their own canvas for the same decision. Then you compare. Suddenly, the invisible becomes visible. You see that half the team is solving for purpose A and half for purpose B. You see that one person is treating assumption X as a fact, while another is questioning it. You see that someone's inference rests on information nobody else has. Instead of arguing about conclusions, you align the elements. Once the structure matches, the conclusions converge fast. The traps people fall into. But people resist this. They say intuition is enough, that externalizing the elements is overkill for experienced thinkers. Wrong. Intuition is pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is only as good as the patterns you've seen. Structure makes intuition reliable. It catches the cases where your gut is wrong because the situation doesn't match your past experience. Intuition without structure is gambling. Intuition with structure is expertise. Others treat assumptions as facts until someone proves them wrong. Backwards. Assumptions are hypotheses. They're provisional bets that need testing, not truths that deserve the benefit of the doubt. If you're building a strategy on 5 untested assumptions, you're building on quicksand. Surface them. Test the critical ones. Accept that some will be wrong and plan accordingly. And then there's the viewpoint objection. People worry that considering multiple perspectives will dilute the truth, that you'll end up with a watered-down compromise that satisfies no one. Also wrong. Multiple viewpoints expose blind spots. They surface the risks and trade-offs you'd miss if you only looked from one angle. You don't have to agree with every viewpoint, but you do have to understand them well enough to know what you're sacrificing when you choose one path over another. Tactical moves that work. Let's get practical. You want to keep assumptions from drowning your canvas? Color code them. Assumptions in yellow, evidence in green. If your page is mostly yellow, you're guessing. If it's mostly green, you're grounded. The visual contrast makes the difference obvious. You want to think through implications fast? Use a 2-column table. Left column, benefits if this works. Right column, risks if it fails. Force yourself to fill both sides with equal rigor. Most people stack the benefits and hand-wave the risks. Equal rigor prevents wishful thinking. You want to surface viewpoints without turning it into theater? Use viewpoint chair rotation in meetings. Assign each person a stakeholder perspective, user, engineer, finance, competitor, and have them argue from that view for 5 minutes. Then rotate. This forces genuine perspective taking instead of token acknowledgement. And you want to stress test your assumptions? Try constraint swap. Pick one assumption, flip it to the opposite, and observe what changes. If your entire plan collapses when you change one assumption, that assumption is your crux. Test it first, hard. What success looks like. Start using the thought canvas, and you'll get cleaner problem statements within 5 minutes. No more wandering discussions about what you're even trying to solve. That's good. Keep going, and you'll see faster consensus with fewer scope changes mid-project. Teams align on the elements up front, so they don't discover mismatches 3 weeks in. That's excellent. At the highest level, you develop predictive clarity. You identify risks early, before they become crises, because you've mapped the implications and tested the assumptions. That's best. But watch the traps. Assumption sprawl is real. You'll be tempted to list every possible assumption, and your canvas will become unusable. Fix this by limiting to the top 5 by impact. Backlog the rest. Focus beats completeness. Viewpoint tokenism is another trap. You list perspectives but don't let them inform decisions. Fix this by requiring each viewpoint to connect to a specific decision parameter. If a viewpoint doesn't change what you do, it's decoration. An implication neglect is the silent killer. You map everything else, but skip the then what step. Fix this by forcing a follow-up line for each major claim. If you can't articulate what happens next, you haven't thought it through. The next layer. You've got the structure now. 8 elements, 1 page, visibility that turns invisible tangles into fixable problems. But here's the thing. Seeing the structure isn't the same as filling it with quality. You can have a perfectly mapped argument that's still wrong because the reasoning is broken, the evidence is weak, or the logic doesn't hold. Standards check quality. Elements provide structure. But neither tells you how to build an argument that actually persuades, that carries weight under scrutiny, that moves people and resources. That's the next skill, and it starts with understanding that not all reasoning is created equal. Chapter 4. Strong Arguments. You walk into the room with a proposal. You've done the research, you've mapped the elements, you've checked the standards, you're ready. Then someone asks, why should we believe this? And you realize your answer is a feeling, not a reason. You say it makes sense. You say the data supports it. You say everyone agrees. But when they push, show me how the data supports it. What if everyone is wrong? Your argument crumbles because it was never really an argument. It was an opinion with footnotes. This is the gap between having a position and having a case. A position is what you believe. A case is why someone else should believe it too. Positions are easy. You can hold a position based on intuition, authority, or tribal loyalty. Cases are hard. They require you to show your work, to connect claims to reasons to evidence in a way that survives contact with skepticism. And in high-stakes environments where resources move, where careers hinge on calls, where mistakes are expensive, positions don't cut it. You need arguments that carry weight. Why arguments win? Arguments move people and resources, not because they're eloquent or passionate, but because they're checkable. Someone can look at your claim, trace it back through your reasoning to your evidence, and decide for themselves whether it holds. Clear claims reduce friction. Instead of debating what you mean, people can debate whether you're right. Strong reasons create buy-in under pressure. When the stakes are high and the room is skeptical, a well-constructed reason, one that links your claim to how the world actually works, gives people a rational basis to trust your call. And solid evidence protects credibility long-term. When your predictions pan out, when your recommendations work, people remember that you built your case on facts, not vibes. But most arguments fail before they start because they're missing pieces. You state a claim without explaining why it's true. You offer reasons without backing them with evidence. You pile up evidence without connecting it to a clear claim. The pieces are there, but they're not assembled, and an unassembled argument is just noise. The three-part stack. Here's the structure that works: claim, reason, evidence. CRE. Every argument, no matter how complex, breaks down into these three components. The claim is your conclusion, the thing you want people to accept. One sentence. No hedges. Pick a strong verb and commit. We should expand into the European market is a claim. It might be worth considering exploring potential opportunities in Europe is mush. The reason is the mechanism, the explanation for why your claim is true. This isn't just restating the claim in different words. It's showing the causal or logical link between the evidence and the conclusion. Because European competitors are underserving the premium segment and our product fits that gap is a reason. It tells you how the world works in a way that makes the claim plausible. The evidence is the proof, the data, facts, or observations that support your reason. Market analysis shows 40% of premium buyers report dissatisfaction with current options, and our beta tests in Germany showed 25% higher engagement than domestic benchmarks is evidence. It's specific, checkable, and tied directly to the reason. Stack them together, and you get a testable structure. Someone can challenge the claim, attack the reason, or question the evidence. That's the point. You want your argument to be attackable because that's how you find the weak spots before they matter. An argument that can't be challenged can't be trusted. The three modes of reasoning. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all reasoning works the same way. There are three fundamental modes, and picking the wrong one for the task is like using a hammer when you need a wrench. The tool matters. Deduction is reasoning from general rules to specific conclusions. If all the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. All software with unpatched vulnerabilities is at risk. Our system has unpatched vulnerabilities, therefore our system is at risk. The power of deduction is certainty. If the premises hold, the conclusion is guaranteed. The limitation is you need premises that are actually true, and in the real world, that's rare. Most of what you're working with isn't absolute. It's probabilistic. Induction is reasoning from specific observations to general patterns. You sample, you observe, you generalize. We tested the feature with 500 users. 80% reported higher satisfaction. Therefore, the feature will likely improve satisfaction for the broader user base. Induction doesn't give you certainty. It gives you confidence proportional to your sample quality and size. The power is you can make useful predictions without perfect information. The limitation is you're always extrapolating, and extrapolation can fail when conditions change. Abduction is reasoning to the best explanation. You have an outcome, you generate possible causes, and you pick the one that best fits the evidence. Customer churn spiked last quarter. Possible causes: pricing change, competitor launch, product bug, seasonal variation. The spike coincided with a competitor's aggressive promotion, and our pricing stayed flat, so the competitor launch is the most plausible explanation. Abduction doesn't prove anything. It selects the explanation that's simplest, fits the data, and doesn't require you to assume a bunch of other unlikely things. The power is, it works with incomplete data, which is most of the time. The limitation is, you might be wrong, and you need to stay open to better explanations. Most people default to one mode and use it everywhere. They treat every problem like a deduction and demand certainty they'll never get. Or they generalize wildly from tiny samples because they don't understand induction's limits. Or they dismiss abduction as just guessing and refuse to act until they have proof. All three modes are tools. Use the right one for the context. Building the case. So how do you actually do this? Start with the claim. One sentence, strong verb, no ambiguity. Write it down. If you can't state it clearly, you don't have an argument yet. You have a hunch. Next, provide the reason. This is the causal or mechanistic link. Why is your claim true? What has to be true about the world for this claim to hold? Don't just restate the claim. Explain the underlying logic or mechanism. If your claim is, we should delay the launch, Your reason might be because the core feature still has a 15% failure rate in edge cases, and launching with that defect will damage trust faster than we can rebuild it. The reason shows how the claim follows from how systems and people actually behave. Then supply the evidence. Relevant, credible, sufficient. Rank it by quality. Note the uncertainties. If you're using induction, state your sample size and confidence range. If you're using abduction, list the rival explanations you considered and why you rejected them. If you're using deduction, write out the premises explicitly so people can check whether they're true. Now, label the reasoning mode. This forces you to be honest about what you're claiming. Are you saying this conclusion is certain given the premises? That's deduction. Test for validity. Are you generalizing from a sample? That's induction. Check sample quality and base rates. Are you inferring the best explanation? That's abduction. Compare alternatives on fit, simplicity, and independence. Finally, stress test it. Ask falsification prompts. What would prove me wrong? What evidence would change my mind? Search for disconfirming facts. If you can't find any, you're not looking hard enough. Every strong argument has boundaries, conditions under which it fails. Know them before someone else finds them. The myths that mislead. People think more evidence automatically makes a stronger argument. Wrong. Without structure, evidence misleads. You can bury someone in data and still make a terrible case if the data doesn't connect to the claim through a valid reason. Structure first, then evidence. A tight argument with modest evidence beats a loose argument with mountains of data every time. Others think deduction is always superior because it offers certainty. Also wrong. Deduction only works when your premises are rock solid, and in most real-world decisions, they're not. You're working with probabilities, not certainties. Forcing deduction onto inductive or abductive problems creates false precision. You end up claiming certainty you don't have, and when reality diverges, your credibility tanks. And then there's the dismissal of abduction as just guessing. Backwards. Abduction is disciplined inference to the best explanation. It's how you make progress when data is incomplete, which is almost always. You generate hypotheses, rank them by plausibility, and test the most likely ones first. That's not guessing, that's efficient reasoning under uncertainty. Refusing to use abduction because it's not deductively certain is refusing to act until you have perfect information, which means never acting at all. Tactical execution. Let's get concrete. When you're building a deductive argument, write the premises as explicit statements. No hidden steps. If your logic is all A are B, X is A, therefore X is B, write it exactly like that. Let people attack the premises. If they can't, the conclusion stands. When you're using induction, add confidence ranges. Don't say users prefer feature X. Say, based on a sample of 300 users, we estimate 65 to 75% prefer feature X with 90% confidence. That's honest. It shows you understand the limits of your data. When you're using abduction, score rival explanations on 3 criteria: fit with the evidence, simplicity, and independence from other unlikely assumptions. The explanation that scores highest across all 3 is your best bet until new evidence changes the picture. And always run 2 final gates: so what and compared to what. So what forces you to articulate why the claim matters? If the answer is not much, you're arguing about trivia compared to what forces you to consider alternatives. If your claim is strategy A will work, the real question is, will it work better than strategy B or doing nothing? Context matters. What winning looks like. Start building arguments this way, and you'll get concise, checkable cases that end circular debates. People can see your logic, test your premises, and decide based on merit instead of volume. That's good. Keep going, and stakeholders will adopt your CRE format because it accelerates decisions. They'll start expecting claims backed by reasons, backed by evidence, and conversations will shift from posturing to problem solving. That's excellent. At the highest level, you become trusted in high-stakes rooms for consistent rigor. Your track record of sound arguments earns you influence that compounds over time. That's best. But watch the traps. Evidence-light conclusions are common. You make a claim, offer a reason, and skip the evidence because it feels obvious. Fix this by defining decision thresholds up front. What evidence would be sufficient? Don't move forward until you hit that bar. Hidden premises collapse logic silently. You think your argument is airtight, but you're relying on an unstated assumption that's false. Fix this by making every premise explicit and inviting attacks on them. If a premise can't survive scrutiny, rebuild. Mode mismatch is another killer. You use deduction where abduction fits, claiming certainty when you're really making an educated guess. Fix this by reclassifying the context. What kind of reasoning does this situation actually require? Rebuild with the correct mode. And overclaiming from small samples destroys credibility. You generalize from 3 data points and present it as universal truth. Fix this by stating the limits of your data explicitly and seeking replication or triangulation before you scale conclusions. The missing piece. You've got the structure now: claim, reason, evidence. 3 modes of reasoning. Stress tests to find weak spots before they matter. But here's the thing, even a perfectly constructed argument can lead you astray if the evidence itself is garbage. You can reason flawlessly from false premises and arrive at disaster with confidence. Structure tells you how to argue, but it doesn't tell you what to trust. And in a world where data is plentiful but quality is scarce, knowing how to evaluate evidence, how to rank sources, how to triangulate findings, how to separate signal from manufactured noise is the difference between arguments that hold and arguments that shatter when reality hits. Chapter 5, Evidence First. Someone shows you a chart. Revenue is up. The new strategy is working. Time to double down. You nod, ready to commit resources, until someone else asks a simple question. Compared to what? Turns out revenue is up, but so is everyone else's. It's a rising tide, not your strategy. Or the data only covers 2 weeks. Or it's from a single region that always outperforms. The chart didn't lie, but it didn't tell the truth either. You almost made $1 million bet on noise masquerading as signal. This is the evidence trap. Data feels objective. Numbers feel solid. But bad evidence is worse than no evidence because it gives you false confidence. You stop asking questions. You stop looking for alternatives. You commit hard and fast to a direction that collapses the moment reality checks in. And the worst part? You never see it coming because the evidence looked so convincing. The quality ladder. Not all evidence is created equal. Some evidence is a whisper, interesting, suggestive, worth noting, but not worth betting on. Other evidence is a shout, strong enough to move resources, shift strategy, change minds. The difference isn't volume, it's structure. And if you can't tell the difference, you'll treat whispers like shouts and wonder why your decisions keep failing. Evidence quality predicts decision quality. Feed low-grade inputs into your reasoning, and you get high-variance outcomes. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you crash, and you never know which until it's too late. Feed strong evidence in, and your choices stabilize. You still won't be right every time, but your error rate drops, and your confidence is calibrated to reality instead of hope. Over time, that gap compounds. The person who consistently uses better evidence makes better calls, earns more trust, and gets more opportunities. The person who doesn't gets bypassed for safer bets. So how do you know if evidence is strong? There's a hierarchy. At the bottom, you've got anecdotes, someone's personal experience, a single observation, a story that feels compelling but proves nothing. Anecdotes are useful for generating hypotheses, but they're terrible for testing them. One person's success with a tactic doesn't mean it works generally. It means it worked once, for them, under conditions you don't fully understand. Move up, and you hit observational data, patterns you notice in the wild without controlling for variables. Customer surveys, usage logs, market trends. Better than anecdotes because you're looking at more cases, but still vulnerable to confounding. You see a correlation and assume causation. You miss the hidden variables driving both. Higher still is experimental data, controlled tests where you isolate variables and measure effects. A/B tests, randomized trials, before and after comparisons with control groups. This is where you start getting real traction because you're not just observing, you're intervening and measuring what changes. At the top is synthesis, Multiple independent studies converging on the same conclusion using different methods. When observational data, experimental results, and theoretical models all point the same direction, you've got something solid. Not certain, but solid enough to act with confidence. Most people treat all evidence as equal. They cite an anecdote with the same weight as a controlled experiment. They stack weak evidence and call it strong. They don't climb the ladder. They stay at the bottom and wonder why their conclusions keep breaking. Interrogating the source. But even strong evidence can mislead if the source is compromised. Every piece of evidence comes from somewhere, and that somewhere has motives, limitations, and track records. Ignore those and you're trusting blindly. Source credibility breaks into 4 factors. First, expertise. Does the source actually know what they're talking about in this domain? A software engineer's opinion on code architecture carries weight. Their opinion on macroeconomic policy, not so much. Expertise is narrow. Respect the boundaries. Second, incentives. What does the source gain if you believe them? A vendor selling you a solution has an incentive to overstate benefits and understate costs. That doesn't mean they're lying, but it means you need independent confirmation. Follow the money. Follow the career incentives. Follow the reputational stakes. When incentives align with truth-telling, trust goes up. When they conflict, skepticism is warranted. Third, transparency. Does the source show their work? Do they share raw data, methods, limitations, or do they give you polished summaries and ask you to trust the black box? Transparency lets you check. Opacity forces you to take it on faith. Faith is expensive. Fourth, track record. Has this source been right before? Do their predictions pan out? Do their recommendations work? Past performance isn't a guarantee, but it's a signal. Someone with a history of accurate calls earns more credibility than someone with a history of misses, even if they sound equally confident. Score each factor on a simple scale, 0 to 3, and you get a quick credibility check. A source that scores high across all 4 deserves weight. A source that scores low on any one factor needs corroboration before you act. The power of triangulation. Here's the move that separates amateurs from pros. Triangulation. You don't commit based on a single line of evidence, no matter how strong it looks. You demand at least 2 independent confirmations, different sources, different methods, different incentive structures, all pointing the same direction. Why? Because every method has blind spots. Surveys capture what people say, not what they do. Usage data captures what they do, but not why. Experiments control variables but sacrifice realism. Each method sees part of the picture. Triangulation stitches the parts together. Independence is the key. If 2 sources are using the same underlying data, the same method, or the same assumptions, they're not independent. They're echoes. You want sources that could disagree but don't. When observational data says X, experimental data says X, and theoretical models predict X, you've got convergence. That's when confidence is justified. Most people skip this step. They find one source that confirms what they want to believe and stop looking. Or they find multiple sources that all cite the same original study and think they've triangulated when they've just found an echo chamber. Real triangulation is harder. It requires hunting for sources that approach the question differently and seeing if they still arrive at the same answer. Correlation is not your friend. And then there's the oldest trap in the book, mistaking correlation for causation. 2 things move together, so you assume one causes the other. Revenue and marketing spend both went up, so marketing must be working. Except maybe the economy improved, or a competitor exited, or your product got mentioned in the press. Correlation hints at a relationship. It doesn't explain it. To separate correlation from causation, you need to think about confounders, variables that influence both the supposed cause and the effect. You need to think about timing. Does the cause precede the effect, or are they simultaneous? You need to think about mechanism. Is there a plausible causal pathway, or are you just seeing coincidence? The fix is simple, but requires discipline. Before you claim causation, identify at least 3 possible confounders and check whether they explain the pattern better than your preferred story. If you can't rule them out, you don't have causation. You have a hypothesis that needs testing. Decision gates that work. So how do you actually use this? You set thresholds before you see the evidence. Define 3 gates: sufficient, compelling, and decisive. Sufficient evidence is the minimum you need to take the claim seriously, enough to investigate further, but not enough to act. Compelling evidence is strong enough to shift your prior belief and inform decisions, but you're still open to revision. Decisive evidence is when you commit resources, change strategy, and defend the call publicly. Pre-committing to these thresholds prevents you from moving the goalposts. You can't see evidence that barely clears the bar and suddenly decide the bar was lower than you thought. You can't see weak evidence and convince yourself it's strong because you want it to be true. The gates force honesty. For each piece of evidence, you classify it, rate the source, check for triangulation, and then decide: accept, provisionally hold, or reject. Accept means it clears the decisive gate. You're acting on it. Provisionally hold means it's compelling but not decisive. You're updating your belief but staying open. Reject means it doesn't even clear sufficient. You're ignoring it until better evidence arrives. Document why you made each call. When you're wrong later, you'll know where the process broke. Tactical moves that protect you. Let's get practical. When someone presents evidence, ask for raw numbers, not just summaries. Summaries hide details. Raw numbers let you check the math, spot outliers, and see what got left out. If they won't share raw numbers, that's a red flag. Use credibility cards, a quick mental or written scorecard that forces you to rate expertise, incentives, transparency, and track record before you trust a source. It takes 30 seconds and prevents you from overweighting authority or underweighting conflicts of interest. Pre-commit your decision thresholds before you see the results. Write down what evidence would be sufficient, compelling, and decisive before the data comes in. This prevents confirmation bias from warping your standards after the fact. And here's a counterintuitive one: prefer disagreements between sources. When 2 credible sources conflict, they're surfacing a crux, a decisive point where the evidence genuinely diverges. That's where you learn the most. Agreement is comfortable, but disagreement is informative. It tells you where the uncertainty lives and what you need to resolve next. What success looks like. Start applying these filters and you'll stop citing weak sources. Your meetings will shift from opinion battles to discussions about verifiable claims. That's good. Keep going and you'll install explicit evidence gates in your decision process. Fewer flip-flops, clearer audit trails, and when you do reverse a call, you'll know exactly why. That's excellent. At the highest level, your organization adopts your evidence protocol. Error rates drop across the board. Postmortems stop being blame sessions and start being learning sessions because you've documented what you believed, why you believed it, and what evidence would have changed your mind. That's best. But watch the traps. Confirmation cherry-picking is the silent killer. You search for evidence that supports your conclusion and ignore evidence that contradicts it. Fix this by pre-registering your acceptance criteria and rival hypotheses before you start looking. Force yourself to seek disconfirming evidence with the same energy you seek confirming evidence. Overweighting authority is another trap. A famous name says something, and you treat it as gospel without checking the underlying logic or data. Fix this with blind review. Evaluate the content first, reveal the author last. If the argument doesn't hold without the name attached, it doesn't hold. Triangulation theater is when you claim you've triangulated, but all your sources are drinking from the same well. Fix this by ensuring different methods, different data sources, and different incentive structures. If they all cite the same original study, you haven't triangulated, you've just found multiple press releases. And precision theater is when you report numbers to 3 decimal places from data that's only accurate to the nearest 10%. Fix this by reporting uncertainty ranges and data limitations explicitly. False precision destroys trust faster than honest uncertainty. The hidden variable. You've got the tools now: evidence hierarchies, source credibility checks, triangulation, correlation versus causation filters, decision gates that prevent goalpost moving. But here's the thing. Even perfect evidence can point you in the wrong direction if you're asking the wrong question about what's actually driving the outcome. Because evidence tells you what happened. It doesn't always tell you why. And when you mistake a symptom for a cause, when you solve the visible problem and ignore the root mechanism, your fixes don't stick. The issue returns, often worse than before, and you're left wondering why the data lied to you. It didn't. You just weren't looking deep enough to see what was really moving the levers. Chapter 6. Find causes. Customer churn just spiked, 20% higher than last quarter. The team scrambles. Someone blames the new pricing. Someone else points to the competitor's launch. A third person mentions the UI redesign. Everyone has a theory. Everyone sounds plausible. So you pick the loudest voice, roll back the pricing, and wait. 3 weeks later, churn is still climbing. You didn't solve the problem. You solved a symptom. Or worse, you solved nothing at all because you never understood what was actually driving people away. This is the cost of causal confusion. You see an effect, you guess at a cause, you intervene, and you hope. Sometimes it works. Often it doesn't. And when it doesn't, you've burned time, credibility, and resources chasing ghosts. The pattern repeats because you never learn to separate what looks like a cause from what actually is one. The leverage of getting it right. False causes waste everything. They send you down paths that dead end. They create fixes that don't stick because you're patching symptoms while the root keeps bleeding. You implement a solution, declare victory, and 6 months later the problem is back. Often worse because your fix created new complications. Meanwhile, the real driver sits untouched, quietly sabotaging every plan you build on top of it. But when you find the actual cause, the mechanism that's genuinely moving the outcome, you unlock leverage. You intervene once, and the effect persists. Metrics stabilize. Problems stay solved. Your credibility rises because people notice your fixes work while others don't. You become the person they call for the tough, messy problems where the obvious answers have already failed. That's not luck. That's causal clarity. The counterfactual question. So how do you find real causes instead of plausible stories? You start by asking a question most people skip. If X were removed, would the outcome change? This is counterfactual reasoning, imagining a world where the supposed cause doesn't exist and checking whether the effect disappears with it. Say churn spiked after the pricing change. The counterfactual question is, if we hadn't changed pricing, would churn still have spiked? Maybe yes, because a competitor launched an aggressive promotion at the same time. Maybe no, because pricing was the only variable that moved. You don't know until you test the counterfactual, and most people don't test it. They see timing, X happened, then Y happened, and assume causation. Timing is a hint, not proof. The power of counterfactual thinking is it forces you to imagine alternatives. It breaks the narrative your brain automatically constructs and makes you consider what else could explain the pattern. It's uncomfortable because it means admitting you might be wrong about the story you've already committed to. But discomfort is the price of accuracy. Mapping the invisible web. Causality isn't simple. It's not A causes B in isolation. It's A influences B, but C also influences both A and B, and D sits between A and B, mediating the effect, and E is a collider that creates false associations when you condition on it. This sounds complicated, but you don't need advanced math to navigate it. You need a simple visual map. Sketch a diagram with 5 nodes, circles, or boxes representing the key variables. Draw arrows showing what you think influences what. This is a causal map, and even a rough one clarifies your assumptions fast. You see the candidate causes, the variables you think are driving the outcome. You see the confounders, the variables influencing both the cause and the effect, creating spurious correlations. You see the mediators, the variables sitting in the causal pathway, transmitting the effect from cause to outcome. And here's the critical part. You see where your assumptions might be wrong. If you've drawn an arrow from A to B, but you're not sure it's real, that uncertainty becomes visible. If you've ignored a confounder, someone looking at your map can point it out. The map externalizes your causal story so it can be tested, challenged, and improved. Most people skip this step. They keep the causal model in their heads, where it stays fuzzy and uncheckable. Externalize it, and you gain precision. You also gain speed. Teams can align on a causal map in 10 minutes, whereas verbal debates about causality can spiral for hours. Rival explanations are your friend. Here's a move that separates disciplined thinkers from sloppy ones. Generate at least 2 rival causes for every effect. Don't just pick the first plausible explanation and run with it. Force yourself to come up with alternatives that could explain the same outcome. Churn spiked. Rival cause 1, pricing change. Rival cause 2, competitor promotion. Rival cause 3, seasonal variation. Maybe churn always spikes in Q4 and you just didn't notice before. Rival cause 4, product bug introduced in the last release. Each explanation is testable. Each makes different predictions about what you'd see if you looked closer. The discipline of generating rivals prevents premature lock-in. It keeps you honest, and it surfaces the crux, the decisive test that would distinguish between competing explanations. If churn is driven by pricing, rolling back the price should reduce churn. If it's driven by the competitor, their promotion ending should reduce churn. If it's seasonal, waiting until Q1 should reduce churn. Different causes, different tests, different actions. Most people don't do this. They latch on to the first explanation that fits their priors and defend it. Generating rivals feels like extra work. It is. It's also the work that prevents expensive mistakes. Testing without betting the farm. Once you've got rival causes, you need to test them. But here's the trap. Big tests are expensive and slow. If you wait until you can run the perfect experiment, you'll never move. The fix is reversible tests, low-cost interventions that give you signal without locking you into a path. A/B tests are the classic example. Split your users, change one variable for Group A, leave it unchanged for Group B, and measure the difference. If the outcome shifts in Group A, but not B, you've got evidence of causation. If it doesn't shift, you've ruled out that cause and can move to the next rival. Staggered rollouts work similarly. Introduce the change in one region or segment, monitor the effect, then expand if it works or halt if it doesn't. Before and after comparisons with controls give you another angle. Measure the outcome before the intervention, introduce the change, measure again, and compare to a control group that didn't experience the change. The key is designing tests that are reversible. If the test fails, you can undo it without catastrophic cost. If it succeeds, you can scale it. This lets you probe causality without betting the farm on a guess. You learn fast, fail cheap, and iterate toward the real driver. The myths that lead you astray. People think trends prove causes. They see 2 variables moving together over time and conclude one is driving the other. Wrong. Co-movement is not mechanism. Ice cream sales and drowning deaths both rise in summer, but ice cream doesn't cause drowning. The confounder is temperature. It drives both. Trends hint at relationships, but they don't explain them. You need to dig deeper. Others believe more data automatically reveals drivers. Collect enough information, and the cause will emerge. Also wrong. Structure beats volume. You can have terabytes of data and still miss the causal mechanism if you're not asking the right questions or controlling for the right variables. Data without a causal framework is just noise with high resolution. And then there's the myth that root causes are singular. People search for the one thing driving the outcome, as if complex systems have single points of failure. Most effects are multi-causal. Churn might be driven by pricing and the competitor, and a product bug and seasonal variation, all contributing different amounts. Searching for the root cause can blind you to the reality that you need to address multiple causes to move the needle. Execution that works. Let's get tactical. Start by defining the effect precisely. Don't say churn increased. Say churn rose from 5% to 6% month over month in October, affecting primarily enterprise accounts. Quantify the outcome. State the time window. Specificity forces clarity and makes the effect testable. Next, sketch a 5-node causal map. Identify candidate causes, top confounders, and mediators. Keep it simple. 5 nodes max. If your map has 20 nodes, you've created causal spaghetti. Simplify. Focus on the variables that matter most. You can always add complexity later if the simple model fails. Then generate at least 2 rival causes for the effect. Write them down. For each rival, note what evidence would support it and what would falsify it. This creates a decision tree. If you see X, cause A is likely. If you see Y, cause B is likely. Now, design a reversible test. Pick the rival cause that's cheapest to test or most likely to be true. Intervene in a controlled way. A/B test, staggered rollout, before and after with controls. Monitor leading metrics, not just lagging ones. If you're testing whether a pricing change caused churn, watch early signals like trial to paid conversion rates, not just final churn numbers that take months to materialize. Finally, decide and document your assumptions. Write down what you believe is causing the effect and what would falsify that belief. This prevents post hoc storytelling, the tendency to reinterpret results after the fact to fit whatever narrative feels comfortable. Pre-committing to falsification criteria keeps you honest. Quick wins you can use today. Use rival cause bingo in meetings. When someone proposes a cause, challenge the room to generate 2 alternatives in 60 seconds. It's fast, it's fun, and it prevents groupthink from locking on to the first plausible story. Name and quarantine colliders. A collider is a variable that's caused by 2 other variables, and conditioning on it creates false associations. If you're analyzing only customers who complained, you're conditioning on a collider. Complaints are caused by both product issues and customer sensitivity. This can make it look like product issues and sensitivity are correlated when they're not. Spot colliders, label them, and avoid conditioning on them unless you understand the bias you're introducing. Prefer multiple small probes over one big bet. Instead of launching a major initiative based on a causal hunch, run 3 small tests that each cost 1/10 of the big bet. You'll learn faster, fail cheaper, and triangulate toward the real cause instead of gambling on a single explanation. What winning looks like. Start applying these tools and you'll stop chasing wild geese. You'll recognize correlations for what they are, hints, not answers, and you'll demand counterfactual tests before committing resources. That's good. Keep going and your fixes will start sticking. Metrics stabilize because you're solving roots, not symptoms. Postmortems become shorter because the problems don't keep recurring. That's excellent. At the highest level, you become the person teams seek out for the toughest, messiest problems. Your causal maps guide cross-functional execution because everyone can see the assumptions, test them, and align on what actually drives outcomes. That's best. But watch the traps. Confounder blindness is common. You see a relationship between X and Y and miss the variable Z that's driving both. Fix this by asking, what else moved with both X and Y? Force yourself to list potential confounders before you conclude causation. Overconfidence in small tests is another trap. You run one A/B test, see a positive result, and scale immediately. Fix this by replicating. Run the test again in a different segment or time period. Report uncertainty ranges. Expand gradually instead of going all in on a single data point. Causal spaghetti diagrams kill clarity. You try to map every possible influence and end up with an unusable mess. Fix this by capping nodes at 5, iterating as you learn, and highlighting the crux edge, the single causal link that, if broken or confirmed, changes everything. And post hoc storytelling destroys credibility. You run a test, see the results, then craft a story that explains them. Fix this by demanding a pretest prediction written in advance. If you can't predict what you'll see before you see it, you don't have a causal model, you have a narrative you're retrofitting to data. The invisible enemy. You've got the tools now. Counterfactuals to test whether causes are real, causal maps to externalize assumptions, rival explanations to prevent lock-in, reversible tests to learn without catastrophic bets. But here's the thing, even when you find the real cause, even when your tests confirm it, even when your fixes work, you can still get blindsided by your own mind. Because the brain doesn't just make mistakes, it makes systematic mistakes. It sees patterns that aren't there, ignores evidence that contradicts beliefs, and doubles down on errors with confidence. And unless you install defenses against these built-in flaws, all the causal clarity in the world won't save you from the biases that warp judgment before you even start looking for causes. 7. Bias defense. You're certain the project will finish on time. You've checked the plan. You've talked to the team. Everything looks solid. Then reality hits. The deadline slips by 2 weeks, then 4, then 8. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. The optimistic estimates, the untested assumptions, the risks you waved away because they felt unlikely, but you didn't see them. Your brain filtered them out, showed you what you wanted to see, and convinced you that confidence was the same as accuracy. This is the invisible enemy, not external obstacles or bad luck, but the systematic errors your own mind produces. Your brain is fast, efficient, and wrong in predictable ways. It takes shortcuts to save energy, and those shortcuts misfire when the stakes are high. You see patterns that aren't there. You ignore evidence that contradicts your beliefs. You anchor on the first number you hear. You overweight recent events and underweight base rates. And you do all of this with complete confidence, never noticing the distortion. The speed-accuracy trade. Your brain cuts corners because it has to, processing every detail, considering every possibility, weighing every piece of evidence. That's slow and exhausting. So your mind uses heuristics, mental shortcuts that give you quick answers without burning cognitive fuel. Most of the time, these shortcuts work. They let you navigate the world without overthinking every decision, but sometimes they misfire systematically, and that's when heuristics become biases. Bias isn't stupidity. It's not a character flaw or a sign of lazy thinking. It's a feature of how cognition works, a side effect of the shortcuts that make you fast. The problem is these shortcuts don't announce themselves. You don't feel biased. You feel rational, clear-headed, and justified. The error is invisible from the inside, which is why smart people make spectacular mistakes with total confidence. Debiasing isn't about eliminating shortcuts. You need them to function. It's about installing safeguards that catch the systematic misfires before they become expensive errors. You preserve speed while raising accuracy. You keep the efficiency of heuristics, but add checkpoints that flag when they're leading you astray. And here's the leverage. A culture that expects and corrects for bias reduces defensive clashes. People stop treating disagreement as an attack and start treating it as a calibration tool. Fairness becomes the norm, not the exception. The core distortions. So what are these systematic errors? Start with confirmation bias, the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information that confirms what you already believe. You're not weighing evidence neutrally. You're building a case for a conclusion you've already reached. Disconfirming evidence gets dismissed, explained away, or never even noticed. You ask questions designed to get the answers you want. You stop searching once you've found enough support, never checking whether the opposite case is even stronger. Anchoring is the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information you encounter. Someone mentions a budget number, and every subsequent estimate gravitates toward it, even if that first number was a wild guess. The anchor sets a reference point, and you adjust from there instead of reasoning from scratch. The problem is, adjustments are usually insufficient. You stay too close to the anchor, even when it's irrelevant. Availability bias is the tendency to overweight information that's easy to recall. Recent events, vivid stories, and emotionally charged examples dominate your thinking because they're mentally accessible. You overestimate the likelihood of plane crashes because they're dramatic and memorable, even though the base rate is tiny. You underestimate risks that are common but boring because they don't stick in memory. Sunk cost bias is the tendency to continue investing in something because you've already invested, even when the rational move is to cut losses. You've spent 6 months on a project that's clearly failing, but you keep going because walking away feels like admitting the time was wasted. The past cost is gone. It shouldn't influence future decisions. But it does, because your brain hates loss and hates admitting error even more. And overconfidence is the tendency to overestimate the accuracy of your judgments. You think you're right more often than you are. You think your predictions are more precise than they are. You underestimate uncertainty and overestimate control. Overconfidence is the meta bias, the one that makes all the others worse because it prevents you from questioning yourself. Fallacies that break arguments. Biases distort how you process information. Fallacies distort how you argue. They're structural errors in reasoning that look persuasive but collapse under scrutiny. The straw man fallacy is when you misrepresent someone's position to make it easier to attack. Instead of engaging their strongest argument, you create a weaker version, knock it down, and declare victory. It wins debates but loses truth. Ad hominem is attacking the person instead of the argument. Someone makes a claim, and instead of addressing the evidence or logic, you question their motives, credentials, or character. It's effective at discrediting opponents, but it's irrelevant to whether their claim is true. False cause is assuming that because two things are correlated or sequential, one caused the other. You've already seen this in the causality chapter, but it shows up in arguments constantly. We implemented the new process and revenue went up, so the process caused the increase. Maybe, or maybe revenue was already trending up, or a competitor exited, or the economy improved. Correlation and timing aren't proof. Slippery slope is arguing that a small first step will inevitably lead to a chain of events ending in disaster, without showing why each step follows necessarily from the last. If we allow remote work 1 day a week, soon everyone will demand full remote, then productivity will collapse, then the company will fail. Each step is presented as inevitable, but the chain is speculative. These fallacies don't just show up in formal debates. They quietly break real decisions. You dismiss a valid concern because of who raised it. You justify a strategy with a correlation. You resist a small change because you imagine catastrophic consequences. Spotting fallacies in your own reasoning is harder than spotting them in others, but it's where the leverage is. Installing the safeguards. So how do you defend against biases and fallacies without slowing to a crawl? You install routines that catch errors fast. Start with base rate anchoring. Before you dive into the details of a specific case, ask what the outside view says. What's the typical success rate for projects like this? What's the average timeline? What's the base rate of failure? Anchor on that number first, then adjust based on the specifics. This counters the tendency to ignore general patterns in favor of the unique story you're telling yourself about why this time is different. Next, generate a rival hypothesis. For every conclusion you're leaning toward, force yourself to articulate the strongest argument for the opposite. What would a smart, informed person who disagrees say? Not a caricature, a steelman. If you can't make the opposing case compellingly, you don't understand the issue well enough to be confident in your position. This counters confirmation bias by forcing you to seek disconfirming evidence instead of just confirming evidence. Then write a probability estimate with a confidence band. Don't say, "This will probably work." Say, "I estimate a 60 to 70% chance this works because X, Y, and Z." Using numbers instead of adjectives forces precision. It makes your confidence checkable. Later, when you see the outcome, you can score your forecast and learn whether you're systematically overconfident, underconfident, or well-calibrated. Run a fallacy scan before you finalize an argument. Check for straw men. Am I representing the other side fairly? Check for ad hominem. Am I attacking the argument or the person? Check for false cause. Am I assuming causation from correlation? Check for slippery slope. Am I claiming inevitability without showing the mechanism? This takes 30 seconds and catches errors that would otherwise slip through. Finally, do postmortems and update. After a decision plays out, compare what you predicted to what actually happened. If you were wrong, why? Was it bad luck, or did you miss something systematic? Adjust your habits based on the pattern. This creates a feedback loop that retrains judgment over time. Tactical moves that work. Keep a disconfirming question sticky note visible during decisions. Something like, "What would prove me wrong?" or "What am I not seeing?" It's a forcing function. Every time you're about to commit, you see the note and pause to consider the opposite. Use numbers, not adjectives, for likelihoods. Likely means different things to different people, anywhere from 60 to 90%. 70% likely is precise and testable. Numbers force you to think harder about your actual confidence level. Make private pre-estimates before group discussions. If everyone hears the first person's estimate, anchoring kicks in and everyone's numbers cluster around that initial anchor. Write down your estimate privately first, then share. This preserves independent judgment. Ban gotcha games and reward charitable interpretations. If someone misunderstands a point, clarify instead of pouncing. If someone makes a weak version of an argument, help them strengthen it before you respond. This builds a culture where people feel safe revising beliefs instead of defending them to the death. What success looks like. Start using these safeguards, and you'll see fewer impulsive reversals. You'll pause, check for bias, and then decide instead of reacting on instinct. That's good. Keep going, and your forecasts will calibrate. Your confidence will start matching reality within 10 to 20%. Teams will plan with realistic buffers instead of optimistic fantasies, and projects will hit targets more often. That's excellent. At the highest level, you build a fair-minded, self-correcting culture. Disagreements produce learning instead of politics. People update beliefs when evidence changes. Errors get caught early because everyone's watching for them. That's best. But watch the traps. Debiasing fatigue is real. If every decision requires running through a 10-step checklist, people will skip it. Fix this with short checklists and role rotation in meetings. One person plays devil's advocate, another checks for fallacies, another tracks calibration. Distribute the load. Public ego traps kill honesty. If you make a prediction in front of the team and it's wrong, admitting error feels like losing face. Fix this by making estimates private first, then revealing them later. Separate the forecast from the identity. Weaponized logic is when you use rigor to tear down ideas without offering better alternatives. You become the critic who kills momentum. Fix this by pairing rigor with charity. Steelman before you critique. If you can't make the other side's case, you don't get to dismiss it. And overfitting to past errors is when you obsess over the last mistake and overcorrect, creating new problems. Fix this by reviewing patterns quarterly, not reacting to single errors. Look for systematic trends, not isolated incidents. The beliefs that mislead. People think smart means unbiased. Wrong. Experts often have louder errors because they're better at rationalizing. Intelligence gives you more tools to defend bad ideas, not fewer biases. Debiasing is a skill independent of IQ. Others think training once is enough. Read about biases, nod along, and assume you're now immune. Also wrong. Bias defense is a routine, not an event. You need repeated practice, feedback loops, and environmental cues to retrain habits. One workshop doesn't rewire cognition. And people dismiss fallacies as debate tricks, irrelevant to real work. Backwards. Fallacies quietly break decisions every day. You just don't notice because they're embedded in the arguments you're making, not the ones you're hearing. The unanswered question. You've got the defenses now. Base rate anchors to counter overconfidence, rival hypotheses to counter confirmation bias, probability estimates to force calibration, fallacy scans to catch structural errors, postmortems to close the learning loop. But here's the thing. Even with perfect defenses, even with bias-free judgment, you can still fail if you're aiming your attention at the wrong target. Because thinking isn't just about avoiding errors, it's about asking the right questions in the first place. And most people waste their sharpest thinking on problems that don't matter, questions that don't unlock leverage, and details that don't change decisions. The next skill isn't defending against bias, it's learning to aim, to point your limited attention at the crux, the decisive unknown, the question that actually moves the needle. Chapter 8, Ask Better. You spend 3 weeks building a solution. The team works nights, the code is elegant, the design is polished. You launch, and nobody uses it. Turns out you solved the wrong problem. The issue wasn't what you thought it was. You never asked the right question, so you never discovered what users actually needed. 3 weeks, gone. Not because you executed poorly, but because you aimed at the wrong target from day one. This is the cost of bad questions. They send you down paths that dead end. They focus attention on details that don't matter while the real leverage sits untouched. And the worst part? You don't realize you're asking the wrong question until you've already invested time, money, and credibility in the answer. By then, the damage is done. Where attention goes, energy follows. Questions aim attention. They're the targeting system for your thinking. Ask the wrong question, and you'll waste weeks solving problems that don't exist or optimizing variables that don't move the outcome. Ask the right question, and you unlock leverage. You find the crux, the decisive unknown that once resolved makes everything else easier or irrelevant. Leaders who question well reduce rework. They don't just execute faster, they execute on the right things. Their teams spend less time backtracking, less time fixing mistakes that stem from misunderstood problems, and more time making progress that compounds. The difference isn't intelligence or effort, it's the quality of the questions driving the work. But most people don't question well. They accept the first framing of a problem and start solving immediately. They confuse activity with progress. They optimize locally, making small improvements to a flawed strategy instead of stepping back to ask whether the strategy itself makes sense. And they do this because asking better questions feels slower. It feels like you're delaying action. In reality, you're preventing waste. The Socratic scalpel. There's an ancient method for sharpening questions, and it's brutally effective. Socratic questioning. You don't accept terms at face value. You don't let assumptions hide. You don't skip implications. You probe, clarify, and test until the structure of the problem becomes visible. Start by clarifying terms. Someone says, "We need to improve customer satisfaction." What does improve mean? By how much? What does customer satisfaction mean? Is it a survey score, retention rate, or something else? Vague terms create vague goals, and vague goals create misaligned work. Force precision. Define the terms doing heavy lifting in the question. Next, probe assumptions. Every question rests on hidden premises. How do we increase revenue? Assumes revenue is the right metric to optimize. Maybe it is. Maybe the real problem is profitability, and increasing revenue without improving margins makes things worse. Surface the assumptions. Ask, what has to be true for this question to matter? If the assumptions are shaky, the question is too. Then test implications. If we answer this question, what changes? If the answer is not much, you're chasing trivia. If the answer is everything, you've found leverage. Implications force you to think 2 steps ahead, to see whether the question actually unlocks decisions or just satisfies curiosity. Socratic questioning isn't about being difficult, it's about being precise. It's about refusing to build on sand. And it's uncomfortable because it exposes how much we don't know, how many assumptions we're taking for granted, how often we're solving symptoms instead of roots. But discomfort is the price of clarity. Surfacing what's hidden. Most failures trace back to untested assumptions. You assume users want feature X. You assume the market will grow. You assume the timeline is realistic. You build plans on these assumptions, and when one breaks, the whole structure collapses. The fix is simple but rare. Assumption audits. List your top 5 assumptions for any major decision. Not every assumption, just the big ones, the load-bearing beliefs that, if wrong, would invalidate your plan. Then mark which ones are testable. Some assumptions you can verify quickly with a survey, a prototype, or a conversation. Others require experiments or time. Identify the cheapest test for each testable assumption and run it before you commit resources. This converts uncertainty into a test plan. Instead of hoping your assumptions are right, you check. Instead of discovering broken assumptions 3 months in, you discover them in week 1 when pivoting is cheap. And here's the leverage. Most teams skip this step entirely. They treat assumptions as facts until proven otherwise. You treat them as hypotheses to validate. That gap compounds into a massive advantage over time. The power of reframing. Here's where it gets interesting. The same problem looks completely different depending on how you frame it. Frame it as a user problem, and you focus on experience, pain points, and workflows. Frame it as a system problem, and you focus on architecture, dependencies, and bottlenecks. Frame it as a time problem, and you focus on sequencing, deadlines, and phase gates. Different frames surface different solutions. Most people lock into the first frame they encounter and never shift. Someone says, "Users are churning," and you immediately frame it as a user problem. What's wrong with the experience? But maybe it's a system problem. The onboarding flow is broken. Or a time problem. Users churn after 30 days because that's when the trial ends and the value hasn't clicked yet. Each frame points to different interventions. Deliberate reframing widens your option set. Take 10 minutes and generate 3 frames for the same problem: user impact, system mechanics, and time dynamics. Write down what each frame makes visible and what it hides. Often the breakthrough comes from a frame you wouldn't have considered if you'd stuck with the default. Reframing isn't spin. It's not about twisting the problem to fit a preferred solution. It's about seeing the problem from multiple angles so you don't miss the real leverage point. And it's fast. 10 minutes to reframe, then you pick the frame that best fits the evidence and the decision at hand. Crafting the core question. So how do you actually write a better question? Start by stripping it to neutral language. Remove adjectives, motives, and blame. Why is the team so slow? Is loaded. It assumes slowness, assigns it to the team, and primes a defensive response. What factors are extending our cycle time is neutral. It opens inquiry instead of assigning fault. Neutral questions get honest answers. Loaded questions get defensive ones. If you want to learn, ask neutrally. If you want to win an argument, ask with an edge. Most people do the latter without realizing it, then wonder why conversations go sideways. Next, make it specific and answerable. How do we succeed is too broad. What are the 3 conditions that, if met, would double our conversion rate in the next quarter is specific. It defines success, sets a time frame, and focuses on conditions you can test. Specific questions generate specific answers. Vague questions generate vague ones. Then ask disconfirming and implication questions. What would prove us wrong forces you to define falsification criteria. If this is true, then what forces you to think through consequences. These questions prevent you from chasing ideas that feel good but don't survive scrutiny. Finally, choose the crux to resolve next. You've surfaced assumptions, reframed the problem, and written neutral questions. Now pick the single most decisive unknown. The question that once answered makes the other questions easier or irrelevant. One decision, one test, one owner. Focus beats completeness. Tactical execution. Time box reframing to 10 minutes. If you spend an hour exploring frames, you're overthinking. Generate 3 frames fast, pick the best one, and move. Speed matters. Replace "why are we failing" with "what conditions produce success." The first question focuses on blame and past errors. The second focuses on mechanisms and future actions. Same problem, different frame, better answers. Use "how might we" to open options, then narrow. "How might we reduce churn" generates a wide set of possibilities. Then you add constraints. How might we reduce churn without increasing support costs? Constraints don't kill creativity, they channel it toward viable solutions. And here's a simple move that changes meetings. Write the core question at the top of the agenda and refer back to it every 10 minutes. Does this discussion answer the core question? If not, you're drifting. Redirect. What winning looks like. Start asking better questions, and you'll get clearer briefs and goals. Teams align faster because everyone's solving the same problem. Fewer tasks go off track because the target is precise. That's good. Keep going, and you'll discover root problems faster. Dead projects get killed early before they consume months of effort. Resources get reallocated to higher leverage work. That's excellent. At the highest level, you achieve strategic breakthroughs with fewer iterations. You're known for finding the decisive question, the one that cuts through complexity and unlocks the path forward. That's best. But watch the traps. Endless questioning kills momentum. You can always ask one more question, surface one more assumption, reframe one more time. Fix this with decision deadlines and a good enough bar. Perfect clarity is impossible. Sufficient clarity is enough. Leading questions bias answers. Don't you think we should prioritize feature X? Isn't a question. It's a statement disguised as one. Fix this with neutral wording and peer review of prompts. If someone can tell what answer you want, rewrite the question. Frame whiplash confuses teams. You start with a user frame, switch to a system frame mid-discussion, then pivot to a time frame. Nobody knows what problem you're solving anymore. Fix this by documenting the chosen frame and sticking to it for the cycle. You can revisit frames later, but not mid-execution. And ignoring stakeholder viewpoints creates blind spots. You ask great questions, but only from your perspective. Fix this with viewpoint chair rotation. Assign someone to argue from the user's view, someone else from engineering's view, another from finance's view. Force perspective taking. The beliefs that limit you. People think strong leaders have answers, not questions. Wrong. Direction emerges from sharper questions. The leader who asks, "What's the crux?" finds the path faster than the leader who declares, "Here's the answer," without understanding the terrain. Others think specificity kills creativity. Also wrong. Constraints create breakthroughs. Design something cool produces nothing. Design a feature that reduces onboarding time by 50% without adding support burden produces focused innovation. Creativity needs boundaries to push against. And people dismiss reframing as spin, as manipulating perception instead of solving problems. Backwards. Reframing is seeing the real problem. The first frame you encounter is often the wrong one, inherited from whoever framed it first. Reframing is intellectual honesty, not manipulation. The final integration. You've got the tools now: Socratic probes to clarify terms and surface assumptions, assumption audits to convert uncertainty into tests, reframing to widen options and find leverage, neutral, specific questions that aim attention at the crux. But here's the thing. Knowing the tools isn't the same as using them daily. Knowing what to do and actually doing it, consistently, under pressure, when it's easier to skip the hard questions and just move. That's the gap between understanding and mastery. Because everything you've learned so far, standards, elements, arguments, evidence, causality, bias defense, questioning, they're all separate skills. Powerful in isolation, but exponentially more powerful when integrated into a single system you run every day. And that integration, that daily practice that turns sharp thinking from a heroic effort into your default mode, that's what separates the people who know this stuff from the people who live it. Chapter 9. Keep sharpening. You've got the tools, standards to judge quality, elements to map structure, arguments that carry weight, evidence hierarchies that separate signal from noise, causal reasoning that finds roots instead of symptoms, bias defenses that catch systematic errors, questions that aim attention at leverage. 8 chapters, 8 systems, all designed to turn fuzzy thinking into inspectable work. But here's the truth. Knowing the tools and using them daily are different games. You can understand every framework in this book and still default to sloppy thinking under pressure because understanding doesn't rewire habits. Knowledge sits in your head. Mastery lives in your reflexes. And the gap between the two is closed by one thing: deliberate, repeated practice that turns conscious effort into automatic execution. This final chapter is about integration, about taking everything you've learned and weaving it into a system you can run in minutes, in conversations, in emails, in decisions that matter. The goal isn't perfection, it's compounding mastery. Less effort over time, better results, more trust. You're building a flywheel. Each cycle makes the next one easier. Each win builds credibility that opens doors. Each mistake caught early prevents 10 downstream. And it starts today, with one decision, one action, one commitment to think sharper than you did yesterday. The system in summary. Let's consolidate. Standards judge quality. You've got 9 questions: clarity, accuracy, precision, relevance, depth, breadth, logic, significance, fairness, that you can run in 3 minutes on any claim, argument, or plan. They make quality visible and measurable. They give you a shared language so teams stop arguing about subjective impressions and start fixing objective gaps. Elements map structure. Purpose, question, information, assumptions, inferences, concepts, viewpoints, implications. 8 components that, when externalized on a one-page canvas, expose contradictions, reduce cognitive load, and align teams fast. You see the parts, so you can fix the whole. Strong arguments move people and plans. Claim, reason, evidence. CRE stacks that translate opinions into testable structures. Match the reasoning mode to the task. Deduction for certainty, induction for generalization, abduction for best explanations, and you optimize for the right kind of confidence. Validity and soundness checks catch hidden premises before they collapse your logic. Evidence and causality test truth. Rank evidence by quality. Interrogate sources for expertise, incentives, transparency, and track record. Triangulate with independent confirmations. Separate correlation from causation with counterfactual tests and simple causal maps. Design reversible probes that give you signal without catastrophic bets. Bias defense protects judgment. Pre-commit base rates to counter overconfidence. Generate rival hypotheses to counter confirmation bias. Write probability estimates with confidence bands to force calibration. Run fallacy scans to catch structural errors. Postmortem and update to close the learning loop. Better questions create leverage. Clarify terms, probe assumptions, test implications. Surface the top 5 assumptions and mark which are testable. Reframe problems across user, system, and time dimensions. Ask disconfirming and implication questions. Choose the crux, the decisive unknown, and resolve it next. That's the system. 8 layers, each building on the last. And when you run them together, they compound into something greater than the sum of the parts. The power you now hold. So what can you do with this? You can make faster, cleaner calls under uncertainty. You don't need perfect information to decide with confidence. You set evidence thresholds, document assumptions, and move when you hit the bar. You distinguish reversible choices from irreversible ones and calibrate speed accordingly. You stop second-guessing because you've built your case on checkable logic and solid evidence. You can build a reputation for sound judgment. Over time, people notice your decisions hold up, your predictions pan out, your recommendations work. You become the trusted voice in high-stakes rooms because you've earned it through consistent rigor. Stakeholders seek your input first. Opportunities find you. Career resilience follows because the skills that make you sharp in calm times make you indispensable in crises. You can lead with fairness without losing rigor. You steelman opposing views before you critique them. You name assumptions instead of questioning motives. You separate the argument from the person and focus on what's true, not who's winning. This builds trust. People know you're not playing politics. They know you're searching for the best answer, not defending your turf. And that fairness, paradoxically, makes your conclusions more persuasive, not less. The relationship dividend. Here's a payoff you might not have expected. These skills improve your relationships. Not just at work, but everywhere. You listen for standards, clarity, relevance, logic, and reflect them back. I hear 3 claims. Let's test each one. That's not pedantic, that's respect. You're taking someone's ideas seriously enough to engage with them rigorously. You reduce defensive spirals with charity. Instead of attacking conclusions, you surface assumptions. It sounds like you're assuming X. Is that right? How would we test it? You're not questioning their intelligence or motives. You're questioning the premise, and you're inviting collaboration to check it. That shift, from adversarial to collaborative, changes the tone of every difficult conversation. You align on purpose and implications early. Before you dive into solutions, you clarify what you're trying to achieve and what happens if you succeed or fail. Fewer surprises, more shared wins. Relationships strengthen because you're solving problems together instead of talking past each other. What you can do right now. Let's get concrete. You can deconstruct complex claims on the fly. Someone makes a bold assertion in a meeting. You mentally run CRE, claim, reason, evidence, in 2 minutes. You identify the claim, check whether the reason actually supports it, assess the evidence quality, and assign a confidence estimate. You don't need to announce this process. You just do it, and your questions get sharper because you know exactly where the weak links are. You can design quick tests that actually decide. Someone proposes a strategy. Instead of debating it endlessly, you ask, What's the smallest test we could run to check this? One metric, one threshold, 1 week. You define what success looks like before you start, run the test, and let the data decide. This accelerates learning and kills bad ideas before they consume months. You can forecast with calibrated confidence. You make predictions. I'm 70% confident this feature will increase retention by 10 to 15% within a quarter, and you track them. Over time, your 70% estimates hit about 70% of the time. Your confidence matches reality. That calibration is rare and valuable. It means people can trust your judgment, not just your conclusions. The compounding effect. Here's where it gets powerful. Continued practice improves results with less effort. At first, running the 9 standards feels slow. You have to consciously check each one. But after 100 reps, it's automatic. You see vague language and your brain flags it before you finish reading the sentence. You see weak evidence and you instinctively ask for triangulation. Checklists become reflexes. Reflexes become identity. You don't think about thinking sharply, you just do. Feedback loops compound accuracy. Every week, you review one decision. What did you predict? What actually happened? Where did you go wrong? You adjust your habits based on the pattern. Maybe you're consistently overconfident in timelines, so you start adding 20% buffers. Maybe you're underweighting base rates, so you force yourself to anchor externally before diving into specifics. Small adjustments, repeated weekly, retrain judgment over months. And here's the multiplier: cultural spillover. Your standards become the team standards. People start pre-checking their work before bringing it to you. They adopt CRE format because it accelerates decisions. They run assumption audits because they've seen how much rework it prevents. You're not enforcing rigor through authority. You're modeling it, and it spreads because it works. The whole organization gets sharper, and your influence compounds beyond your direct contributions. Your first move. So what's the first thing to do? Pick a live decision you're facing today. Not a hypothetical, not a low-stakes practice run. A real decision with real consequences, something you need to resolve this week. Run the 9 standards on it. 3 minutes. Is your framing clear? Is the information accurate? Are you precise enough to test this? Is it relevant to your actual goals? Have you thought past the surface? Are you considering multiple viewpoints? Does the logic hold? Does this decision matter? Are you being fair to opposing views? Write down the weakest standard, the one where your thinking fails hardest, and fix it before you move. Write the CRE stack. 1 sentence for the claim, 1 paragraph for the reason, the causal or mechanistic link, 1 section for the evidence, ranked by quality with sources and confidence labels. Label your reasoning mode. Deduction, induction, abduction. Make it explicit so you can check whether you're using the right tool for the job. Define the smallest decisive test. What's the one thing you could check in the next week that would move your confidence up or down by 20%? 1 metric, 1 threshold, 1 owner. Write it down. Commit to running it. Let the result inform your next move. That's it. 3 steps, 10 minutes total. You've just applied the entire system to a real decision. And if you do this once, you'll see the value. If you do it weekly, you'll build the habit. If you do it for a year, you'll rewire how you think. The choice that defines you. Clarity compounds. Every time you choose precision over vagueness, evidence over opinion, fairness over bias, you're making a deposit in a long-term account. The returns aren't immediate. You won't feel smarter tomorrow. But 6 months from now, you'll look back and notice your error rate has dropped. Your decisions stick. Your influence has grown. People trust your calls because your track record speaks. Mastery is a daily choice, not a one-time event, not a certification, not a finish line. It's the decision to run the system today, even when it's easier to skip. To ask the hard question, even when it's uncomfortable. To steelman the opposing view, even when you're certain you're right. To update your beliefs when evidence changes, even when it means admitting you were wrong. Winners act, measure, improve. They don't wait for perfect conditions or complete information. They move with the best data available, track what happens, and adjust based on results. They treat every decision as a learning opportunity, every mistake as feedback, every success as a data point to replicate. And over time, that loop, act, measure, improve, creates a gap between them and everyone else that looks like talent but is actually just disciplined practice. You've got the map now. Standards to judge quality, elements to map structure, arguments to persuade, evidence to ground truth, causality to find roots, bias defenses to protect judgment, questions to aim attention, and a system to integrate them all into daily practice. The tools are here. The path is clear. The only question left is whether you'll use them, whether you'll take the first step today with a real decision and commit to sharpening your thinking one rep at a time. Because the world doesn't reward the people who know the most. It rewards the people who think the clearest, decide the fastest, and earn trust through consistent rigor. Start small. Start today. Never stop sharpening. The gap between where you are and where you could be isn't talent, it's reps, and the first rep starts now.